Hey, you're on mute.
Okay, I decided to come on early since I was like the speaker.
Yeah, ditto.
Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Let me make sure I sent the right Zoom link out to everybody.
Okay.
I feel like
There's a lot going on tonight. Miss America, the Democrat debate.
oh man, I'm making people miss that.
Miss Universe, I think it is. Miss Universe. I saw a commercial for Miss Universe.
Yeah, and people are typically late to this.
Yeah, I just figured I'd show up early and make sure that my link and audio and everything was good to go.
Yeah. Everybody. That later. Well, I hope it's just not us two.
Well, it looks like Renee just joined in, but she's still muted.
Yeah, I mute everybody on when they first log in.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to keep myself not videoed because I'm sick and look like crap. So
Oh, we
I'm
hope you
here
feel
in
better,
spirit.
Renee.
'Tis the season, right?
Oh, the gift you
Oh,
don't want to keep
yeah,
giving.
you are saying it. Whew.
Hey, Lindsay, did I know that you were an Aggie? I don't think I
I
knew.
don't know.
Did you know that I'm an Aggie?
Yes,
I'm class
I
of 8.
did because I went to your website and I looked up.
Are you stalking me?
Of course. Of course. I want to be like you. I'm going to stalk you appropriately and professionally.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm class of 88.
Well, I don't want to make you feel old, but I already feel old. I'm class of 07.
That's okay. My son's class of 19.
Oh!
He graduated in May.
Wow, congrats. That's a big deal.
Yeah, he's adulting now.
Yeah, that's
He's
not fun. Hi, Kathy.
Hey, Kathy.
Hello.
Hey, Kathy, I passed on your information to someone today.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. She found me. Anyway, this is very exciting. We can use our initial time where people log in.
Yeah, this is what this is about. Y'all talk.
So she is like a case manager who places people after they get out of their treatment programs. And she's based in Dallas. And I was like, well, you need to know my good friend Kathy Taylor because she does what I do in Weatherford. So her name is Amara. So if a lady named Amara reaches out to you,
Okay.
you can internally thank me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm hoping that works out.
That'll be great.
Yeah, it's a thing, man. Make a living out of placing people once they get out of treatment programs.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing what people do now for a living.
Hi, Anne. Welcome.
Hello.
Anne's joining us from Australia, guys.
Oh, no, from New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand. Sorry. Oh, golly. I just committed a sin.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Oh,
So what time is it in New Zealand?
Sorry, what was that?
What time is it in New Zealand?
It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon of Friday the 20th.
We're talking to somebody in the future.
Yeah, it's very awesome. We're just about to finish for the year. The organisation I work for shuts down on Friday night and then doesn't reopen until the 6th of January. So I've got 2 weeks off.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's the middle of summer here for us. So, it's like nice weather and barbecues and strawberries and cherries and things like that.
I'm so jealous.
So jealous.
It's cold here in Texas.
I think it's colder in New England.
True. Very true. Renee, where are you from?
Connecticut.
Oh, yes. Have y'all had a big snow yet?
Not too bad. We've had a couple of snowstorms that surmounted to like 8 inches. But today was 10 degrees and I had a very full caseload and I was not happy.
Well, full caseload is good. Cold weather, not so good.
I was secretly praying that my clients would cancel and they didn't.
Yeah, 10 degrees and just Texas just closes. The whole state just closes.
Yeah, shuts down.
10. How about 30?
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll give everybody here another probably 1 or 2 minutes and get the show on the road because I know we all are busy and I know a lot of people were going to watch the recording as well. Hi, Laura. Laura's on mute.
Hi. Sorry, it's taking me a minute to find it.
No, you're good.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, Anne. Renee.
Anybody have any fun plans for the holidays?
No.
I have a reverse commute. Usually, I'm from Fort Worth, Texas originally, and usually on Christmas Day, we drive up to Fort Worth because on Christmas Day, no one's driving. It's a great day to actually drive. But my son, his first job is in Fort Worth, Texas, so he's actually driving down to Houston on Christmas Day and staying from Christmas to New Year's Day. So we're doing a reverse commute. So we're in a staycation.
Nice.
It's quite good to be able to do that. I will, because it's summertime, I will do swimming and lying around in the sun and am I making you jealous yet?
Oh my God, so jealous.
That sounds terrible.
And I'll probably go to my friend's place and take my horses with me and we'll go down to her river and we go and swim the horses in the river and have a picnic beside the river and things like that. So, yes.
It's lovely.
Wonderful.
How about you, Kathy?
My kids are coming in town on Saturday and Sunday, so that'll be good. We don't really have anything particularly planned other than we're going to build or decorate some gingerbread houses as a family.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Nice.
They're 22 and 24, but we're going to go back to
It never gets old. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We're a small group tonight, but that's okay. We know people will be watching the recording later. Oh, I am recording. Okay, good. So tonight we have Miss Beverly Walsh with us, Dr. Beverly Walsh.
That's right.
Yeah, you earned that, didn't you?
I did.
Gotta use it. And she is a natural life-manship trainer, and she is speaking to us tonight about trauma-informed boundaries. So just in time for the holidays, we're all fixing to go do family things and spend time with people that maybe will zap our energy a little bit, or so it's really good to learn how to set connected relational boundaries instead of setting boundaries. But with that, I will let Dr. Walsh introduce herself to everybody.
Well, hey, everybody. Can y'all all hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. So I am on this call from Houston, Texas, and I work at a place called Red Inn Ranch, and I've been there since 2009. So when Lindsay reached out and said, hey, do you want to talk about this stuff? I said, sure, why not? You know, usually I was like, well, are you sure you don't want Bettina to talk about it? She's the one that wrote the blog. And she was like, well, Bettina has something else. So I guess I'm like number 2 in line, which I'm really okay being second to Bettina. Not a problem.
I'm sorry.
No,
You were on my list anyway. You were going to get tapped.
Oh, gosh. So I got into doing equine-assisted psychotherapy in kind of a roundabout way. I started working at Red Inn Ranch in 2009, and my colleague, Lori Baldwin, who got me into it. And I was originally trained in a different model, and as I was doing that other model, I was recognizing that some of the things we were doing wasn't always good for the horse. Maybe it was good for the person, and the person or the group had like a big aha moment and they had a good experience. But I thought, God, you know, that's really not good for the horse. And if I were the horse, I wouldn't feel good about that. And as I got into working with natural life-manship, which has a lot of one-liner things that are important to us, you know, the idea was if it's good for one, it's good for none. And so the work that we were doing that wasn't necessarily good for the horse, it was like, well, that meets that standard. If it's good for one, it's good for none. And then that kind of segues into the idea about healthy connections and boundaries and stuff. So I got introduced to natural life-manship in 2012, and it's actually through one of the people on this call, which is Kathy Taylor. She hosted the training in Aledo, Texas, which is outside of Fort Worth, where I'm from originally. And I got exposed to the model and then originally went, oh my gosh, this is like everything I learned in graduate school, all kind of rolled up in one. So that's when I started doing natural life-manship stuff. I do have my PhD in counseling psychology from Texas A&M. Whoop. I tell people to call me Beverly when I'm working with the horses. I tell people horses do not care that I have a PhD in psychology. What they care about is, am I trustworthy? Am I predictable? Do I have healthy boundaries? Am I respectful? Am I looking for a healthy connection? So you can call me Beverly. Either one is fine. I have a private practice, and I see 20 to 25 individual or family clients a week. It's a private self-pay practice, and I do about 2 groups a week. And the couple of people I work with are like ADHD kids, kids on the spectrum, anxiety, high conflict families. So just to kind of give you a sense of who I am and what I do. So that's what I do. My little disclaimer is that although I am a trainer with natural life-manship, I do not work for natural life-manship. And so the things I'm going to talk about are things that we talk about in natural life-manship and are trauma-informed and based on our model. But I'll also be giving some Bevisms. So some of the things that I'm pondering out loud and continuing to think about when I think about boundaries or any other things. We spend a lot of time in natural life-manship actually talking about boundaries. So this is kind of a hot topic for us because we're kind of going back and forth and going, well, does it mean this? Does it mean this? What does it look like? And that's one of the things I like about being a trainer with natural life-manship, because we're always having these really hard conversations, and then they make me think, and I'm like, oh, my brain, really? So, but it's good for all of us to not go on autopilot. So one of the things I thought about doing and talking about trauma-informed boundaries is giving us some context. And I think I'm going to talk about for about 20 minutes is my understanding. Is that right, Lindsay? And then we'll do Q&A and kind of see where that conversation goes. I want it to be more conversational because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Everything should be kind of conversational.
Yeah, and would you like everybody to maybe politely interrupt you with the question, or would you rather wait till the end?
Let me go through my stuff, but I have the chat box open. So if someone wants to like raise their hand or like, wait a minute, I have a thought about that, then we can have a conversation about that.
How about I monitor it for you?
Okay. I'm cool with that. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah, I have it on the side thing, but if you can monitor it, that'd be groovy as well.
Sure will.
So to give some context, because you asked me to talk about trauma-informed boundaries, and I have like paper here so that I can remind myself how I want to talk about this, is the definition for trauma that we talk about in natural life and ship, and just kind of just some definitions that we're all used to, is trauma is extreme stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Trauma is the subjective experience of a threat to life. And I love that part, it's subjective. Who gets to decide if this is trauma with a big T or a little t? Me. So that subjective experience of a threat to life, bodily integrity, or sanity. An adverse circumstance or ongoing set of circumstances that negatively affect a person in the present. And feeling of extreme physical or psychological helplessness coupled with the overwhelming power of emotional trauma. So those are different definitions, but the way that we in natural life should really just like sum it up is we say any situation in which survival is the overriding concern. And therefore the brain must make changes to accommodate that need for survival. So any time you go into that back part of your brain and you're getting into that fight, flight, or freeze place, that is our working definition of trauma with either a little t or a big T. And then when we talk about trauma-informed therapy, we're talking about, we really reach deep into the work of Dr. Bruce Perry and his trauma, his NMT model, the neurosequential model of therapeutics and education. As a side note, every other year he does this conference in Banff, Canada. If you can go, you should go. It's just an amazing experience. It's either in June or July in Banff every other year, and it's an amazing experience. So when Dr. Bruce Perry talks about trauma-informed therapy, he has these 6 R's that he talks about. And the first R is relational. And when you're doing trauma-informed care, our biggest idea is that the relationship is the vehicle for change. So his 6 R's are that it's relational and that the relationship should be safe for both of us, emotionally safe, physically safe, spiritually safe, all those things. And that it's, the other R is that it's relevant, meaning that it's developmentally matched for where I am. What's relevant to me as a 53-year-old woman is different than what may be relevant to a 16-year-old teenage girl or a 6-year-old young boy, right? And so in terms of being trauma-informed, you have to be relational, you have to be relevant, which is developmentally matching where a person is, repetitive, so we talk about those patterns. How do we form cattle trails? Just cow hoof after cow hoof after cow hoof, that pattern, that repetitive pattern is what creates cattle trails, and what we mean by that is neural pathways. We mix our metaphors all the time, right? So we're talking about cattle trails in your brain. That is rewarding. It should be fun when I'm having trauma-informed care and I'm diving deep into some stuff that's really hard. I really should have that outcome that I'm looking for, and it be rewarding. That is rhythmic, which means it's predictable, and that is respectful to the child, respectful to the family, respectful for the culture. So that's the context I'm coming. This is the lens I'm coming from when I talk about trauma-informed boundaries. This is the lens I'm looking for trauma. This is the lens I'm looking through for trauma-informed therapy. And then in natural lifemanship, even though we don't talk about the C's, like Dr. Bruce Perry talks about the R's, the 6 R's, we have a lot of C's in natural lifemanship. And so the biggest C we talk about is connection. So connection with attachment, which means I can be right next to you. I can smell you. I can touch you. I'm in the same space with you. And then connection with detachment, which is that you're on the other side of the state of Texas, or for Anne, on the other side of the world from us. So we're still connected, but we're detached. We don't want to go for disconnection. And I'm going to spring forward a little bit and I'll come back. What we believe in natural lifemanship is that when we set a boundary, a lot of times that's about disconnection. Get the hell away from me, which is a disconnecting, disengaging thing to do. versus having a boundary, which is that this is my hula hoop, and I'm going to invite people to come into my hula hoop and share space with me in a way that works best for both of us. Because again, if it's good for one, it's good for none. So I'll talk more about having boundaries and setting boundaries. But so one of the C's is connection. The other C is choice. And that choice is to ignore, resist, or cooperate. Because it's always fair to ask for connection. But if I don't have a choice to ignore you or resist you, if it's not safe to say no, then my yes is not meaningful. And I do have young people that I work with where they're like, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And then you can tell they're on autopilot. And so that's really not a relational yes. That's an autopilot compliant yes. And healthy boundaries don't happen within the context of compliance. Healthy boundaries happen within the context of cooperation and connection. So cooperation is the other C that we talk about. So connection and choice and cooperation, consent. The absence of a no is not a yes. So I have to have consent and be able to be willing and able to say no in my relationships in order to have healthy boundaries. And then the other C is control, but control of myself, not somebody else. And if I'm going too fast, I see some people that are like kind of writing down. If I'm going too fast, just say, slow down, Beverly, or can you repeat that?
It's recorded.
It's recorded. And then the other C that I add is this is a Bevism, not a natural life one, is being curious. Although we talk a lot about curiosity. If I'm doing mind reading and I know why you're doing what you're doing, I'm not being curious. I want to know, I wonder the reason you're doing what you're doing. Because if someone's doing something because they have to go to the bathroom, they like come in and they like bump into me as they're going to the bathroom. Well, that's different than bumping into me because they're being a jerk, right? So I have to wonder, what's the reason they're doing that? Being curious. So those are the C's that I'll talk about. How am I doing so far? Is this giving us some context for trauma-informed boundaries? So the next thing I thought about doing is the beauty of the internet. So I thought, I wonder what the internet says to people about boundaries. And so I just Googled personal boundaries. And I actually got this really cool article. It was a really quick article, and the title is, What Are Personal Boundaries and How Do I Get Some? I said, well, that's kind of a cool name or a cool title. I'll go for it. And she just talked about there's several boundaries, because I don't want to go through my psychology stuff. I just want to see what is like the world at large saying about boundaries. What's like people just in, oh good, you're like writing these things down. Look at that. So she talked about material boundaries. So that's, you know, your material stuff. Who do you give and lend things to? Who do you give and lend your money to, your car to, your clothes, your books, your food, your toothbrush? It's material boundaries. That makes sense. And then your physical boundaries, and that's your personal space and privacy in your body. Do you give a handshake or do you give a hug? To whom and when? What do you think about loud music and nudity? So I got a segue. Physical boundaries. I had a group, and there was a lady in this group who really, really was struggling with the natural life-and-ship idea of consent and boundaries. And she was in a substance abuse treatment program. And she had a lot of horses. So when I talked about physical boundaries with the horses, because she came up to one of our horses whose name is Penny, and pennies are just most emotionally regulated horse that we have. And she went up and she just decided that she was going to just put that halter on and just get it done. And Penny almost kicked her. I've known this horse for 10 years. And I can count like 3 times I've seen this horse try and kick somebody. And so then we were like, well, you know, how did that happen? And did you ask Penny, may I put the halter on you? And as I'm running halfway across the field going, pause, can you pause? Because Penny's about to kick out. And this woman had a really hard time with the idea of physical boundaries. She said, you mean I have to ask my 5-year-old child if I can hug him? And I said, yes, you should ask your 5-year-old child, may I hug you? It just looks like this, you know, putting outreach in your hands. And she didn't like that. And she threw her hands up and said, well, I'm out of here. She's done. So she didn't like the idea that even a 5-year-old, because I don't own that 5-year-old, right? I should ask for consent. So the physical boundaries, mental boundaries, which apply to your thoughts, your values, and opinions. Are you easily suggestible? Do you know what you believe, and can you hold on to your opinions? Can you listen with an open mind to someone else's opinions without becoming rigid? If you become highly emotional, argumentative, or defensive, you may have weak emotional boundaries. I was like, God, I really like how this lady's talking about this. Emotional boundaries. Distinguish separating your emotions or responsibility for them from someone else's. It's like an imaginary line or force field that separates you and others. Healthy boundaries prevent you from giving advice, blaming, or accepting blame. And I love this part where she says about preventing you from giving advice, because when I'm giving advice, I'm trying to control somebody else. And in that moment, I'm trying to set a boundary instead of having a boundary. It's the same thing when people do you should therapy. You should do this, you should do this, you should therapy, versus like really listening and helping a person come up with their answers because they are the expert on themselves. Sexual boundaries, protect your comfort level with sexual touch and activity, where, when, with whom. And then spiritual boundaries, which relates to your beliefs and experiences in connection with your God and your higher power. So this is just like what a Google search gave me. And I was like, oh, this is pretty good. So that segues me to the blog post from Bettina, where we talk about setting boundaries and having boundaries. And this is the part that we're kind of going around and around in natural lifemanship. And I love this conversation that they're having. Did you ever have a chance to review that blog? You can just shake your head and say, yes, yeah. So y'all already read it, so we don't have to talk too much about it, and I won't go through it. But what I believe that when we're setting boundaries, a lot of times setting boundaries is about putting a wall up and saying, this is where I want you to be. Stop. And I'm telling you what I don't want you to do instead of what I want you to do. And that reminds me of when we're teaching lifeguards to work with people around the pool. And when I was growing up, the lifeguards would say, don't run, don't run, don't run. And then all the kids heard was run, 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 versus walk, walk. And so having a boundary is, this is what we're going to do together. What do I want us to do together? Instead of what do I not want you to do? Because when I set a boundary and say, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, I'm not giving the alternative, which is what's good for us. And that keeps the relationship in me thinking instead of we thinking. And having boundaries is about being able to say, where am I in our space together? And when we're forming relationships and forming connected relationships, we're always asking that, is this okay for us? Is this okay for us? Is this okay for us? And if I have healthy boundaries and I respond with that assertive voice of being able to say, yeah, that works for me and that works for us. Or no, that doesn't work for me and this doesn't work for us. How do we get to a yes? So that's the idea. And so when you have boundaries, you're finding that assertive voice and that assertive response to how do we dance in this relationship together. If I'm having to set a boundary, it's probably because I found myself having a passive voice. And so at some point, that passive voice leads to resentment and then leads to aggression. I also don't want to use that aggressive voice. That aggressive voice is too much pressure for the relationship. The passive voice is too little pressure for the relationship, and the assertive is just the right amount of pressure and energy I need for us to be able to communicate and respond to a request. When we think about setting boundaries, that setting boundaries place can come from a place of fear and anger and dysregulation. So when we're thinking about trauma-informed therapy and trauma-informed boundaries, if I'm reinforcing someone to set a boundary that comes from a place of fear and anger, my concern is that I'm reinforcing a part of a person's brain that's already muscled up. And I don't want to do that. I want to reinforce a fully integrated brain. I want to reinforce a response to where our boundaries are instead of a reaction. Is this making sense? Okay. So, what does this look like? How do I invite people and welcome people into my hula hoop? So this is how I talk about boundaries a lot with because I work a lot with kids. And so I use a lot of visuals. And so I had my hula hoop, I had my body bubble around me. And who do I choose to invite into my hula hoop? And who do I, not invite into my hula hoop? Because I have a right to be able to say, I want people to come into my space, right? But it's that importance of what do I want them to do? And so again, it's that requesting to walk. Because we focus on the don'ts, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have thought about this before, had this example before, where you tell people to close their eyes, and then you say, don't think about pink elephants. Stop thinking about pink elephants. I do not want you to think about pink elephants. And what are most people then thinking about? Pink elephants, right? And so what do I want us to do in our relationship together? And what does that sound like? In those relationships, and you're looking for your assertive voice, who gets to decide if I'm being passive, assertive, or aggressive, me or the other person? This is where someone has to unmute themselves and chime in.
At risk of being wrong, I'm going to go with, I don't know the answer. Me? Nope,
Yeah.
the other person.
The other person gets to decide if I'm being passive, assertive, or aggressive. And this is really important when you think about people working with horses, and you have somebody who is just using a lead line, and they're just like swinging that lead line around, and the horse is just eating grass. And the horse is completely ignoring the person. And that horse is like, you're just out of control with your energy all over the place, but you're not even on my radar. The other person gets to decide if I'm being passive, assertive, or aggressive. Personal experience I had with this is I was at the Wild Horse Sanctuary in September for intensive with natural life-manship. And I was working with a 18-month-old Mustang, and she had never been touched by a person ever. And she was in a round pen. And I'm pretty good about knowing what a 1 is with my horses on a scale from 1 to 10 in terms of my energy level, and using the least amount of pressure to be able to make a request and honor those boundaries that we have in our relationship with the horses. I'm pretty good at knowing what a 1 is with the herd I work with. My 1 with this Mustang was like an 8. So she was telling me the energy that I was coming into that relationship with was like putting her out of her window of tolerance. And because she was so reactive, and we talk about choice, and the choice is to ignore, resist, or cooperate, this Mustang was so reactive and so in the back part of her brain that she could not even choose to ignore me. Because my 1 was like to her an 8, because she was in like that back part of her brain. I had to teach her to ignore me. The first thing I had to do in our relationship so that we could start understanding boundaries and forming a connection and forming a relationship, I had to teach her to ignore me. Because without being able to ignore me, then she also could not choose to resist me, and she also could not choose to cooperate with me. So I had to teach her to ignore me. And that's a whole other conversation, right? But how did I do that? I had to self-regulate. I had to co-regulate. I had to be predictable. I had to use rhythm. I had to be relational. All those things that we do in trauma-informed care. Because I did not want to be, in that moment, in that space with her, I was a stressor, right? That was traumatic for her. And she was responding in she was having a trauma response. So the first time that she actually lowered her head and ate a little bit of leftover hay, and the first time she put her nose to her shoulder because there was a fly on it, I was like, oh my gosh, she ignored me. And like Tim and I are like jumping up and down. Oh, look, she ignored me. Now we can start a conversation and we can start figuring out where are our boundaries together. So that can be how it looks. But in terms of being passive, assertive, or aggressive, the other person or being, sentient being, is to let us know if we're being passive, assertive, or aggressive. And that lets you know how much energy do I have to put into that conversation in order to have boundaries. And so if someone's ignoring you, our model in natural life and ship is that we slowly increase our pressure so that people can acknowledge where that boundary is. And if they're resisting me, I'm going to remain the same. And if they're going to cooperate, I'm going to take that pressure off so we can continue to have this relationship dance together. The thing that it looks like in terms of having healthy boundaries is knowing if that other being, whether it be a horse or a person, is having a hard time regulating. And what's the reason they're having a hard time regulating? And then we talk about HALTs, HALTS, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and scared. And that could be a reason why they're having a hard time honoring the boundary that we have together. But if I think I know the reason why you're having a hard time, I have to set a boundary instead of helping that person learn to control themselves. The goal is that they get to control themselves and I get to control myself. The idea is to empower versus enable. Professionally, what does that look like? It's the same principle, right? We talk about a good principle is a good principle no matter where you apply it. But professionally, when do I respond to emails and when do I respond to text messages and when do I take holiday? And so Anne gets to take a holiday beginning tomorrow for a really long time, which is awesome. And with horses, what does that look like, having boundaries with horses? And Tim has all kinds of stories. For those of y'all who know Tim Job, this is one of my favorite Tim Job stories about having boundaries with horses. He had gone to a training and then the lady owned the horse. And the horse was a kind of a mouthy horse, right? So the horse would be like going up to her and doing this. And the lady kept doing this. She kept smacking the horse, smacking the horse, smacking the horse, right? Setting a boundary. So Tim says, hey, I noticed that you're putting your hand up on that horse's mouth. What's going on? And she said, I'm setting a boundary. What's the reason you're setting a boundary? Well, because he's putting his mouth on me and I don't like it. And Tim was like, oh, how long have you had this horse? She said, 8 years. Because how long have you been smacking that horse in the mouth? 8 years. So, is setting the boundary working? Because this is the deal. If I have boundaries, if I have a connected relationship, the need to set a boundary is going to go away. And that's what that blog that Bettina wrote about that young child, that young boy. He never even had to teach Ladybug to stop biting. It just happened because they have boundaries. We're going to do the right thing for the relationship when we have boundaries. But I have to be in tune with myself. I have to also be connected with myself in order to have healthy boundaries. And if my boundaries, to use a psychological term, are squishy, what happens to the relationship? If my boundaries I have with myself are really rigid, what happens to our relationships? And hopefully the goal is that they're flexible. Because I want to have clear boundaries, but if something's going on and it's something's broken or bleeding, I'm going to be able to go through the stop sign, right? We all stop at stop signs. That's a pretty clear boundary, right? That's the rule. That's the expectation. That's the standard. But when I was in labor and my husband was driving me to the hospital, he may have slowed down for the stop sign, but he did not come to full stop. Right? There has to be some flexibility. It's all about context. So that's the context I have for trauma-informed boundaries. And so I just want to let you know where I was coming from with that. And I wanted to give lots of time to ponder and think about these things together, then also give time for the thing that you talked about, Lindsay, the little, what are we saying yes to? Because I believe we should always find a way to get to a yes.
Absolutely.
When we're having connected, healthy relationships, and I'm making a fair request, how do I get to a yes? If the answer is no, is it the answer no because it's absolute no, or is it because no because I'm tired and need to take my 30-minute cat nap, which I am the queen at doing? And then we get to a yes. How do we get to a yes so that we can stay connected? Because that's the goal. So that's my beginning spiel that I wanted to be able to offer.
Oh, that was lovely. I enjoyed that. All right, well, let's open it up to see if anybody has any questions. You guys can come off mute or type a question in the chat, and we'll have a wonderful group discussion.
I'm still seeing all these mutes. Yeah, at this point, I wanted to just have a conversation. I mean, hopefully this gave you the context that you were looking for and maybe got you pondering about some things. Certainly, there are times for safety where you may have to set a boundary because of safety, but know that there's going to be damage to the relationship. And that there's a difference in having a boundary, of being able to say, I mean, if a horse is kicking and biting and having a hard time regulating, am I going to say, oh, come here, horse, and give me a hug? Or if a teenage client is doing the same things, I mean, it's okay to have that connection, but with detachment. That for now we need to have that space between us so that we can co-regulate and find what's okay for both of us as you're having a hard time, as maybe I'm having a hard time, and then we're keeping that connection, but maybe with some distance between us, which is different than having a disconnection in our relationship. Ponderings.
Yeah. I was gonna add some humor in here and go Bueller. No, yeah. Great 80s movie.
It is.
So can I ask a question about a coaching client that I don't do horses with because she's in Atlanta?
Sure, we can have a conversation about it.
We just meet over Zoom, and so she's and doesn't have a very good relationship with her ex-husband. She said the other day, what'd she say? You'll know where you stand by how I treat you. And I'm like, whoa. I think she still feels really hurt and wounded by this person. And, but she says, but I want to be friends with him. I'm like, okay. So she, to me, has got a lot of anger underneath there. And so she's setting these, she said, I don't want to be connected. And I'm like, well, you have a daughter together. So there is some level of connection no matter what. And so she was just saying, I either you're all in or you're all out. She doesn't really have a middle ground. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain that to her or help her. I wish she could just come with me with the horses. It would be a lot easier.
Well, and connection's on a continuum, right? And so, if she's going into black and white thinking, and this is the thing I love about Dr. Bruce Perry's model, and I think you're familiar with that one, right, Kathy, where he has this idea of your mental state of being calm, alert, alarm, fear, terror. Mm-hmm. And that when we're in a mental state of calm, we're able to be in our whole brain, and we have all this abstract thinking, and we can do amazing problem solving. So part of when you're saying that she's, all in or not, is the idea that concrete thinking, that we're black and white. And so that kind of gives you some information about maybe where she is in her brain, mm-hmm. Right? Because things are on a continuum, and connections on a continuum. And there's certainly is a trauma to that connection with the father of her kids. When she says, I want to be friends with him, is she confusing friends with being friendly with him?
Possibly. Yeah.
And what does she mean by friends? And certainly friends is on a continuum as well. Was that having boundaries about, I have some friends that we meet, off-site somewhere else at a local restaurant or something like that. They're more acquaintances, right? And then you have those friends that they come in the back door, they know the code to your house, and they don't even knock, they just come on in. So helping her see what that continuum is, because my boundaries with you are going to be different with somebody else. And how do we get to a place that's okay for both of us? There's also, for some people, there's this idea about being, are they already divorced? So some people have this idea about being divorced to the father of the kids versus being divorced from the father of the kids. That little prepositional phrase, right? You don't want to be divorced to somebody, or don't want to be divorced from somebody. That give you some ideas, and then she gets to decide what those boundaries are.
Yeah.
And what keeps her okay emotionally and physically and socially and all those things. Because you're right, she's connected. And then what does that healthy detachment look like?
Yeah.
And when they reattach, what does that secure attachment look like for their relationship?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I broke the ice. Somebody else needs to go.
I guess just to participate in this, I talk with clients a lot about setting boundaries, and it's a lot more evident, I think, in the round pen with horses when you can ask them, what are the boundaries you want to have for yourself? But I'm interested to discuss or hear from others and how they help clients understand what their boundaries should be and the challenges that they face in it.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's really, and it's interesting because some people, it's about building that awareness, because in order to have boundaries, I have to be connected to myself. Yeah. And so what's the attachment style that that person has? We're asking our clients to get to a place of secure attachment and not be dismissive or entangled or any of the other attachment styles that don't work for healthy boundaries. Because I mean, I have a client who has this horse that comes up and he starts nibbling on her and she's laughing and it's funny, and at some point that turns into something else, because this horse, he's not trying to bite people, but he wants to groom people the way that he grooms a horse. Well, guess what? I'm not a horse. I don't have a thick coat like a horse. So even though he can use his teeth to groom another horse, teeth on me is not going to be okay. And so what's a healthy standard that works for our relationship? And so the idea, and it comes up in interesting places with my clients, even like in using the lead line to help people learn self-regulation. People will start swinging the metal end of the lead line. And I'm thinking, is that going to work out for you in the long run? And it's not even their awareness. They just are on autopilot. And so in terms of having healthy boundaries, just having to have to wake up all parts of your brain and your body. And when we work with people that have trauma, big T or little t, a lot of times there is that level of dissociation and disconnection from themselves. And so when you notice that, another example, there was a lady who the horse had put his hoof on her foot. Not really heavy. It wasn't like full on stepping on her foot, but it was enough that it was like on the edge of her shoe. And she just stood there. And I think we would all agree that that probably is not going to work out for both people in the long run, right? And it would be okay for her to have a boundary and say, oh, you're in my hula hoop. And she just stood there. And she didn't know how to say no to the horse.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things we talk about in terms of context, that if I've been taught that it's not okay to say no, that I've always been taught that the only okay answer in our relationship is yes, which is compliance, then a person's not going to know how to have boundaries because they're not tuned into what's going on in their own body.
No, I appreciate it, because I do think, yeah, you see so much of it shows up in their attachment style and working with that, and also with just their awareness of themselves and what they need and being able to define that to even say what a boundary is. So I'm just thinking about the progression, which I know is different with every client. So I'm thinking about clients, and yeah, it's different in understanding, you know, who they are and what they need. To help them get to that sort of more confidence and comfort and understanding what a boundary is, when most people can feel like boundaries are deterring to people. And understand, like I'm always talking about Brene Brown's conversation on boundaries and how important that is to have them, to have relationships at all.
Yes. Yes. And it's so important to be clear about those too and be predictable, because if one day the way I present myself in the relationship with you is this way this day, but the other day it's different, and it's different, it's that squishy lack of predictability, then how confusing. How do you enter into a relationship dance with me if I'm always changing the steps up? And so that predictability is really important. And again, it's back to awareness. And I'll even like entering the round pen with a horse. I will have a person, you know, I'll suggest, you know, stop before you get into the round pen, make sure the horse is connected with you. And then I'll ask them, who should go into that space first? How do you want to enter the round pen? What do you think would be like physically safe for y'all's relationship? And it's interesting, a couple of times I'll have people say, well, the horse should go in first and I'll go in behind the horse as I have a lead line on the horse. How's that going to work out in the long run? How are you going to do that? And just stopping and thinking, how do I want to do this? How do I want to be in this relationship? And to unlock that part of the brain that's been in compliance for so long and having those people that are on autopilot. So it is going to be a process. I can't have boundaries if someone's always told me and controlled me. Learning how to control myself and controlling my big feelings and controlling my body and my heart and my thoughts, knowing what I really do believe about stuff. This is really simple stuff, even like asking parents to start doing with kids at a very early age. Like, when you Chick-fil-A is really big in Texas. So if you live in Texas, this may not work for you, but I'm always saying, when you go to Chick-fil-A, who places the order? And having the person be able to learn to place their order. This is what I would like to be able to put in my body. Just something as simple as that is teaching that person to have boundaries.
I agree. I think that there's part of what I think I've seen is that there's a sense that boundaries are a negative thing to have. And I think just shifting that idea that having a boundary is not a negative thing. It's not, and helping people understand that it's needful and helpful. I think it's, you know, just a big first step, really.
Yes, exactly. And that, I think what people are thinking about is setting a boundary, get away from me, jerk. Versus let's have a conversation about what works for our relationship. So yeah, and some people are, what's the fear associated with having a boundary? And is part of the fear that you won't like me, that you won't want to stay with me. Classic example of talking about codependency is, you know, let's say a man and a woman are going on a first date, and the man pulls out a cigarette and he says, do you mind if I smoke? And the lady says, oh, no, smoking's fine, even though she's allergic to cigarette smoke. And first date becomes second date, becomes third date, becomes fifth date, and they've gone out, he's smoked in the car, they've gone to the smoking section of a restaurant, which you can't do in Texas anymore, but you know, this is the dated example. And at some point she says, I don't like that you smoke. So, you know, what does he think about that statement? Like, why didn't you tell me, the first time? What's the reason she didn't say anything the first time? Maybe afraid that he wouldn't like her, that they wouldn't be able to go on a second date. So all that stuff, as you start digging deeper, is like, what's the reason people have a hard time having boundaries? Because their stuff gets pulled up. That's a good point that you're putting out there, Laura.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the article's comment about setting boundaries and having boundaries and helping people understand, instead of having to negotiate your boundary, right, and having a sort of fluid definition of what you accept and not accept, to know what is acceptable. Which I was just trying to think through that idea of setting, which to me seems like every time I'm in an encounter, I'm setting a boundary, instead of I have boundaries as myself outside of relationships with other people, and then I encounter people. Does that make sense? Is that kind of how you?
Yeah, and how exhausting it would be to have to set boundaries over and over and over again. That's exhausting.
For sure.
And I'm trying to control somebody else, right? Versus controlling myself. And in controlling myself, and well, to say, this is what works for our relationship. I mean, it's okay to have those. It's okay to make requests, right? Hey, one of the things that's important to me is that when I start dinner, I'd like to be able to have a clean kitchen to be able to start dinner. So when I come home at 5 o'clock, if the kitchen can be clean so I can start dinner, that'd be really helpful. Versus, what's wrong with you people? Don't you know that we're living like a pigsty and none of y'all having dinner? I'm canceling Christmas. Right? Which is a reactive way to be versus responsive and conversational.
Right, because the next thing is, what do you do when your boundaries are crossed, and how do you handle, right? Like the story they talked about with Timothy, like instead of reacting, you know what they are. Like it's not just having them, but them being able to handle when they're violated.
Yeah.
Only without, from a more securely attached place.
Yeah, not going into shaming and blaming, but finding out, what's the reason we're having a hard time getting to a yes that works for both of us.
Yeah. And they're all learning steps, right? There's like the whole acknowledgement. There's the, understanding what your boundaries are and being able to tune into your own needs, working on your own attachment style, and then navigating, when you get triggered, when boundaries get crossed, and how do you mindfully manage that?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And that's the work that we do with clients, because there's a reason why they're having a hard time in relationships, because that disconnection or dissociation or hypervigilance or any of those coping strategies that were adaptive at the time when they were experiencing trauma, but over time have become maladaptive for this moment.
Hey, Beverly, I was wondering, so, when you and I talked on the phone earlier, we talked a little bit about this whole concept of reparenting. But when it comes to having boundaries for self with people with an insecure attachment style, what's a good place to start either understanding what your boundaries are and then having boundaries for self? Can you touch on that a little bit?
So my go-to is always to be able to first practice bottom-up brain regulation. If I don't have, and so that's that rhythmic sensory pattern input, and if I don't have that regulation, then I can't stay connected to myself. And then know, what does my body need right now? And then make that request of myself. So that's always my go-to. And so we talk about regulate first, relate second, and then reason last. And that regulation, hopefully with the secure attachment, came from that primary attachment, that co-regulation, that offer regulation, be carrying you, is so essential. But if we didn't have that, then we got to start over and help a person learn to regulate first. Under stress, use stress, and then not go to distress.
That's a really good place to start. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I saw you had unmuted yourself. Did you have a question for Beverly?
No, I was actually just going to comment that actually not having your own boundary, not having your own boundaries is incredibly stressful for the people that you work with as well, because that's for your clients and for your colleagues and for your people in your personal life, because that means that you're not a solid rock, or you haven't even got that, it's like Beverly, you were talking about the bottom up regulation. It's like, I think that you need that as the foundation for everything else that you build on. And if you haven't got a foundation that you know about, then how is anyone else going to know about it?
Exactly. Well said. I mean, it's what when you have children of alcoholics and they'll talk about, I didn't know which dad was coming home today. I didn't know which mom was coming home today. That lack of predictability. And then I don't know how to be with you. And, if you're in the work environment, it's like, well, which person's showing up today? And to think about it as a horse, which person is showing up today, to come work with me? And so how do I give you feedback? How do I have a conversation with you? And yesterday I could have this conversation, and then today you've gotten into this reactive place. And so, yeah, the like predictability is so essential.
Just before you talked about the bottom up regulation, and you talked about rhythmic and something else, and it sounded good. It was like a good thing.
That's Dr. Bruce Perry stuff. So the sensory rhythmic input.
Sensory.
Yeah, rhythmic, sensory, repetitive, rhythmic input. So
that's repetitive.
Yeah. And so that you can either have that passive sensory input, which is what the horse does for us, right? So when we're on top of a horse and the horse is moving your body, or you're on a rocking chair, or you're in a hammock, any of that sensory passive rhythmic input that something else is providing for me is going to help regulate the brainstem. The thing that's different from a rocking chair or a hammock or a swing is that when you're on top of a horse, the horse is also offering connection. And that's the part that's so essential in doing this work that we do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Y'all don't be shy.
I just muted. Hi, Lindsay.
Hey.
Can you hear? Hi, how are you?
Good. Do you have a question for Bev?
Yes, I do. I love this sensory rhythmic input, and I was just curious what would be some exercises in the round pen, initial exercises to build that for our clients.
So if I'm providing passive rhythmic input, the exercise could be me rocking my own body, because I'm doing it for the person, or moving a lead line, or just even watching the horses walking as you're watching the horses, and that's rhythmic. If the person can move themselves, then you're moving up from the brainstem to the midbrain diencephalon. And so walking, moving the lead line in a rhythmic way. Sometimes I'll have people like move their lead line in an X. So walking together, swaying together, walking with the horse, any of those things that can offer repetitive sensory rhythmic input. If I'm doing the movement myself, then I'm moving up from the brainstem to the midbrain diencephalon. And this is all the work of Dr. Bruce Perry that we incorporate into natural life-manship. And then if I'm then adding that connection to then the therapist, the horse, the family member, then we're starting to regulate the limbic system. And then once I have all that regulated, then I can really have boundaries and healthy connections. And I can't hear you now, so but hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to do this at home, right? When we're about to go into the holidays. And so sometimes what's the best thing to do when someone's having a hard time regulating for whatever reason, and when we're dysregulated, it's hard for us to honor boundaries. Sometimes the best thing to do is say, let's just go for a walk, but be quiet as you go for a walk. It's just walking, and then you can hear the footsteps. And if you're walking in a field, you can hear the grass like swishing, and all that rhythm is regulating the lower regions of your brain. And what we'll start to notice is that people will start walking the step with each other, that entrainment that happens, and then your footsteps are matching. And that's when you know that you're really working your way up in terms of that connection.
So I have a cool story about that. I'm in school. Some of y'all don't know, and some of y'all do know, but I'm in school to become an LMFT. And so I've been doing videotaped mock client sessions. And I took my friend out to do EAP. Sorry, my dogs are playing in the background here. But she would get a little dysregulated, and I would have her go walk around the paddock. And the horse that we were working with, as soon as she got re-regulated and as soon as she got more vulnerable with herself, he immediately started following her every single time. I mean, it was just amazing. But anyway, so I know we're a little past the hour, and everybody probably has last minute holiday shopping to do. So I will be sending out a recording, the link to the recording like I did last time. And the other thing, I forgot to put in the email reminder yesterday, but I did send out a PDF that has a little column that has what am I saying yes to and what am I saying no to. And based off this great talk, I really encourage everybody to sit down for 5 or 10 minutes before we, go into this crazy holiday season next week. I mean, we're already in it, but, and just really think about having boundaries for self and what that looks like for you and what do you need to do to understand your own boundaries. And I think everybody will find that if they can take 5 or 10 minutes, that their holiday will hopefully go a lot smoother. Yeah, and then the only thing that I will say is that I already have our guests lined up for January. I believe it'll be Thursday, January 30th. And it's Sarah Schlote from
It's great.
Equisoma. Yeah, so she's going to talk to us about somatic experiencing. She'll probably explain the types of things that we'll be able to learn at the trainings that she gives. She does trainings in Canada, the south of France, and she's even doing some in Australia, which I know is close to you. And so this woman is amazing. She does great work, talks about polyvagal theory, and a lot of the work that Peter Siegel does.
Dan Siegel.
Yeah. Yeah, or Peter Levine, and yeah, there you go. Okay. But anyway, I encourage you guys to join us January 30th. And Beverly, thank you so much. I think this was very needed, before the holidays, so we appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. Good things to everybody and happy trails.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. All right. Bye.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Have fun in the sun, Anne.
Yeah.
I will do, definitely.
All right. We'll see y'all guys later.
See ya.
Bye.